I'm Dr. John Kruse, and today I'm going to be talking about Vyvanse. Why is it so popular? So as usual, I'll start with the take-home message, and after a minute or two, I will jump into the main body of the talk. So Vyvanse itself doesn't do anything. What do I mean by that? Vyvanse is a prodrug. It's an inactive form of a drug. It needs to be converted into the active form of a drug in your body. The mechanism by which it happens, and I'll explain it in detail, results in a slow, steady release of the medication. So of all the forms of amphetamine that I've prescribed, Vyvanse most commonly has been described as smooth and goes in steadily and does not leave an abrupt withdrawal at the end of the day. So it's popular because it works well for lots of people. Its other big reason for popularity is that it was very heavily marketed before it lost its patent in the US, which was the end of September of 2023. It was, for more than several years, the single most popular, most often prescribed ADHD medication. And before I jump into the main message, I will give a disclaimer. In the past, and that's not within the last 5 years, I've gotten samples to give to patients, so free samples from the manufacturer of Vyvanse. I have attended lunches or other meetings to promote Vyvanse in the past. I have not been a paid consultant, not been aware of any way I've profited individually from Vyvanse. Some people think doctors get a share or kickback from each prescription they write. That, if it's happened, I've been left out of the loop. Not that I would want to be in that loop. So Vyvanse, in one of its commoner other names, is Elvanse. Now it is available as generic Lisdexamfetamine, and that name tells you pretty much what it is. So lysine is an amino acid, and it is linked to the dextroamphetamine molecule. It's chemically linked. The big molecule itself is biologically inactive. It can't do anything. The lysine is very big and bulky, and it's blocking the dextroamphetamine part of the molecule from binding to dextroamphetamine receptors in the brain. But once the lysine is cleaved off, it can act like other forms of dextroamphetamine. The cleavage happens by red blood cells, so this drug needs to be in your bloodstream before it can be converted to an active form. There may be small amounts of the enzyme that do the cleaving in other parts of the body, but they do not seem to be a biologically significant component. Under normal usage, you either swallow the capsule or they also have a chewable tablet form. You swallow it, gets absorbed through your digestive system, a little bit through the stomach, but more through the early part of your small intestines, and then it enters into the bloodstream as the inactive prodrug. And because of this large molecule is a little less sensitive to stomach acidity compared to amphetamine or methylphenidate. So what you've had that day, whether you've had an acidic meal, should have less of an impact on Vyvanse entering your bloodstream. But even more importantly, again, it's not absorption of the drug in this case that controls the onset. The rate-limiting step or the slow step for determining how much is getting available as active drug in your body is that cleavage on the red blood cells. So again, this is part of why empty stomach, full stomach, acidic contents, basic contents should have less of an impact because, again, the speed of absorption is not controlling how quickly this drug is available. So once it's in the bloodstream, then the enzyme on the red blood cells cleaves it into lysine, which is a normal amino acid. It's one of the 20 essential amino acids that we use as building blocks for proteins. If you're eating other proteins, you're getting lysine in your diet. So your body uses lysine, so it's not a foreign substance. It's not an unnatural substance. It's not a toxic substance. And the other part of that molecule is the dextroamphetamine molecule. And the dextroamphetamine molecule can then act on cells that use dopamine and norepinephrine in your body and within your brain. So an important fact about it being a prodrug means that within 100 milligrams of Vyvanse, you do not have 100 milligrams of the active dextroamphetamine. You have only about a third of that. And that's because the lysine molecule is a much bigger molecule than the dextroamphetamine one. So again, the weight of the Vyvanse, about 2/3 of that weight, is inactive for ADHD purposes or psychoactive purposes, lysine. So if you've been accustomed to taking 30 milligrams of Adderall, you do not want to switch over to 30 milligrams of Vyvanse and think you're getting the same thing. You're only going to be getting about 1/10 of the dose. Conversely, you have to be careful the other way. If you've been using Vyvanse at 70 milligrams, you do not want to jump over to 70 milligrams of Adderall because you're going to be getting what would have been more than 200 milligrams of Vyvanse. Most commonly used non-Vyvanse product in the amphetamine world is Adderall. Adderall is a combination of 3-to-1 combination of dextroamphetamine to levoamphetamine. So what are dextro and levoamphetamine? Dextro meaning right-handed and levo meaning left-handed are what are called stereoisomers. So the amphetamine molecule, like most big organic molecules, or even small ones, exists as equal combinations, a racemic mixture that's equal combinations of left-handed and right-handed molecules. So the left-handed version and the right-handed version means that these two items are mirror images, like my left hand and my right hand. On both hands, I have a thumb that's short and stocky and opposable. I have my ringer, my index finger is the longest. So my two hands look similar, but they're mirror images. I can't slap a left hand on my right wrist and have it work properly. Regarding chemical interactions in the body, many of these interactions are taking place with complex three-dimensional receptor systems. So the exact configuration, whether it's left-handed or right-handed, matters a lot. There are differences between left-handed levoamphetamine and right-handed amphetamine, dextroamphetamine. So one of the differences, the levo form actually lasts a little longer in the body. The levo form is actually less active, about only a third as active as the dextro form in the brain. The levo form is actually slightly more active relatively on norepinephrine than on dopamine, but again, overall, on both of those, it's weaker than the dextro form. The dextro form's stronger on dopamine than norepinephrine. So again, with Adderall, it's a 3-to-1 combination of dextro to levo, trying to minimize some of those peripheral side effects on the cardiovascular system, but preserving a longer term effect. More than a dozen now different formulations combining some of the same 3-to-1 ratio as Adderall. There's products like Evicchio and Adhancia, dozens more that do slight tweaking of ratio of left-handed to right-handed amphetamine, that do slight tweaking of how much is quick release, how much are instantly released, how much is more slowly released. Some of them even have 3 sets of release profiles. There are certain individuals who do particularly well with one of those newer drugs in the last 10 years, but I'd say mostly they're messing around with the same basic Adderall formula. And I have not seen, I think most of these differences are more marketing strategies than that they are truly providing a new or different benefit. I'd say, to me, what's new and different, or set something aside again, I think Vyvanse is better in many ways. We have Dextroamphetamine patches, which allow people who have trouble swallowing or digesting that way, entry through the skin. And I'd say Jornay, which delivers at nighttime with 10 hours of no delivery before delivering. I'd say those are substantially technological advances that provide drugs that are substantially different than their competitors. Not ideal for everyone. With the normal profile of action, again, Vyvanse has to enter, absorbed into the body. Within the bloodstream, it's cleaved within the bloodstream. Absorption and cleavage take a while. So for most people, it's an hour or two before there's substantial amounts of amphetamine, dextroamphetamine available to interact in the brain. So the onset of action is usually slower and more gradual than it is for Adderall, including extended release forms of Adderall. Once it's released, it's designed for most people to be delivering the drug and have an active, biologically active dopamine and norepinephrine cells in the brain for about 12 to 14 hours. Individual results sometimes can vary. If someone's benefits are dropping substantially before 12 or 14 hours, it's probably not that the drug is gone, because again, it should be still released and still being cleaved by the red blood cells. It's probably just that it's dropping below a certain level, or their receptors are readjusting during the course of the day to that amount. Vyvanse, more than most of the other slow-release drugs, if you take a much bigger dose, at some level, the ability of your red blood cells, the capacity, is exceeded if you take too big a dose. So the good thing is, unlike taking too big a dose of amphetamine, which is going straight to your receptors and flooding that, so an overstimulation of dopamine, too big a hit. With Vyvanse, there's sort of a brake mechanism that your level of Vyvanse may shoot up in your blood, but your level of dextroamphetamine is not shooting up as high or as quickly because of the rate-limiting red blood cell effect. On the other hand, it also means that going too high above that saturating level, which the red blood cells can't keep up with, it means that you are extending the length or duration of the drug. So some people on bigger doses of Vyvanse suddenly have trouble falling asleep because they've extended the duration of action. They haven't boosted the amplitude above that certain level. Interestingly, when Vyvanse was being designed, it was being designed entirely with thinking of preventing it from being a drug of abuse. Amphetamines cause, in addition to helping with focus and concentration, in addition to helping with energy, they also have mood-elevating effects in many people. That's part of why they are substances of abuse and addiction. And the hope and the thought was, by making it this slow-release mechanism where you didn't get this big hit right away, that would make it unattractive to people who were abusing their medications. And there's some good evidence that it does have less potential for causing addictive problems. There are even studies looking at people who are addicted to either street stimulants or have had addictive problems with Adderall, particularly those who have ADHD and a substance abuse stimulant problem. On Vyvanse has measurably, in a couple of different studies, increased the rate of staying with treatment, increased the rate of not using stimulants of abuse while they are using their Vyvanse. There are some claims that some people do get a partial hit, or some by snorting or injecting Vyvanse. I haven't run into individuals who have claimed that. And again, even if it's getting into your bloodstream more quickly, it is still an inactive drug in your bloodstream. It still does need to be cleaved by those red blood cells before it becomes active. So jumping back again to the dextroamphetamine, levoamphetamine ratios and efficacies, there's some data, I would say take it with a grain of salt, that the action of the dextroamphetamine compared to levo, that the dextro may be more helpful for impulsive symptoms, for hyperactivity symptoms. It does help with attention alone. Dexedrine, a pure form of dextroamphetamine, helps with attention. And that maybe the levo form, which is acting a little more strongly on norepinephrine, is more selective for attentional symptoms. There's also those who promote the idea that the dopamine promoting stimulants and other agents are good for decreasing the noise or the background distraction, and that the norepinephrine is boosting the signal or making something stand out more clearly from the background. I would take those with a grain of salt. There are some people who markedly get a different effect from dexedrine than from Adderall, but most people can't describe it in those terms or notice that much of a difference. Different forms of amphetamine aren't just reuptake inhibitors on dopamine and norepinephrine. One of the ways they differ from drugs like Strattera, from drugs like Wellbutrin, which are also have dopamine and norepinephrine reuptake properties, as these are working on the vesicular monoamine transporter system, VMAT system. So they are causing a greater amount of the neurotransmitter dopamine or norepinephrine to be released each time. So the reuptake inhibitor is basically allowing the signal to be going on for a longer period of time. It's not actually in itself boosting the signal, except the duration of the signal. Whereas one of the things that the amphetamine-based products do and street stimulants do is force a greater amount to be released, which is probably why they are more effective with ADHD and probably why they have their potential for addiction as well. Somewhat debate and conflicting laboratory studies with methylphenidate, and I do have a talk on whether methylphenidate Ritalin is really a stimulant or not, how extensively or how to what degree it causes excess vesicular release is debatable. Some studies suggest it's minimal to none. Some suggest it's some, but substantially less than with amphetamine products. One of the worries with stimulants, medications, including Vyvanse and Adderall, is that long-term exposure, could this be causing damaging brains? Is this giving dopamine excessive hits dangerous over the long term? And lots of parents say, oh my God, I don't want to be rotting my kid's brain, destroying my kid's brain. I do have a separate video on this. The data so far from more than 30 different studies looking at long-term exposure of kids with ADHD who take stimulants versus kids who do not, at the end of years of treatment or by early adulthood, brains of kids who took stimulant medications look more normal than the brains of kids with ADHD who avoided taking stimulants. Cardiovascular effects, I have another talk on that. There are some risks there, but they do not seem particularly common even after more than a decade. So that's a little bit about the biology and biochemistry and practical use of Vyvanse. When I said it's popular, I should flesh that out a little bit more. In 2020, global sales of Vyvanse were more than $2.5 billion. By 2022, global sales of Vyvanse were more than $10 billion. I don't have the latest figures. And again, the crucial factor was in 2023. Vyvanse in the US did go off patent, and now it's available as a generic. Vyvanse was produced and brought to market by Shire Pharmaceuticals. They do other work with ADHD drugs. That was 2007, they got approval. It came on the market in 2008. Within a few years, it was bought out or taken over by Takeda, a Japanese pharmaceutical company. Within a decade of its introduction to the market, it captured more than 32% of the stimulant market. And that's a huge share given that, again, there's a number of different other products. And a huge share, particularly given its cost. So before it went generic, it was routinely over $400 a month as an out-of-pocket cost. Now the companies, first Shire and then Takeda, did have coupons to make it more affordable to people. When I've looked recently at goodrx.com, the official sales price is close to $500. Almost all the drugstores selling it offer some of their own internal discounts. So it's only $400. That's more than $12 a day. The generics, again, their official price, if you had to pay full price out of pocket, is anywhere from $250 to $400 a month. But almost all the pharmacies were offering their own discounts, so that it would be $75 to $150 a month. That's at least $2 to $3 a pill if you didn't have insurance covering it. Now, some insurers are covering brand names, some are covering only the generics. Many times, and I do have a talk on generics, so I won't go into huge detail, most of the problems or most of the times we see differences between generics and brand name drugs is not the substance itself. So the FDA makes sure it's really dextroamphetamine linked to lysine molecule or whatever the chemical constituent of the drug is. Most of the time, there's variation problems. It's in the delivery, timing, the pharmacokinetics, how quickly it gets in, what is the peak level. The FDA does allow some slop. you can be plus or minus 15%, but that means that's almost a 30% difference from the lowest you could be to the highest you could be in terms of how quickly it goes in terms of when the peak is and how much total gets absorbed. And actually, how quickly it goes in is not one of the variables that the FDA is regulating for. It's actually just two. Once generic Vyvanse was available, I had numerous patients who were switched over to the generics without their knowledge, and none of them actually noticed any difference. However, I have, in the year and a half since it's been out, had some people who did feel that certain generics were working at substantially different rates of speed than usual, and that affected their confidence in it and how it seemed to work for them. So in the past, the biggest barrier to Vyvanse's use I've run into was cost. Again, with many insurance plans, it may be comparable to other forms of amphetamine or methylphenidate. Again, for many people, the adjective is smooth. It feels it goes in smoothly, but that itself can be a problem. For some people, it doesn't announce its arrival. It's too gradual. It's too subtle. And some people are either accustomed to or actually need to be sort of shaken up and reminded something's different now. You're in a state that's ready to be working and productive. Vyvanse has become so popular both because it's a really well-designed product, even though they weren't designing it for the slow release mechanism. They were designing it to be non-abusable, but both because it works well and because they did extensive marketing to promote it. Like every other substance out there or drug, it doesn't work. It's not optimal for everybody, but of all the amphetamine-based products, I've had the most consistent and positive success with it. So be safe, be well, and I will be back later.